Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the new and improved COR Standard and Audit tool. Your COR audits are about to get easier. A new audit tool is coming soon that uses clearer language, simplifies and streamlines the process, and reduces the likelihood of making mistakes. The new audit instrument will be used by members of the Canadian Federation of Construction Safety Associations all across Canada, which greatly increases mobility and reduces complexity for construction employers that operate in multiple provinces. Today, we're going to look at what changes the standard brings, how the audit instrument is changing, what you need to do to prepare, and how Construction Safety Nova Scotia is here to support you. So I'm Amanda Siliker. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager. And before I hand it off to Ryan, I just wanted to make a little point that there's lots of ways that you can reach us. We're available on all the social channels. You can give us a call. You can check out our website at constructionsafetyns.ca. You can hop into our office in Burnside if you have any questions at all. We're always here, to help you out in any way we can. So now I would like to introduce Ryan Quinn. Ryan is an OHS advisor and team lead for the quality department at Construction Safety Nova Scotia. He holds his Canadian Registered Safety Professional designation, his National Construction Safety Officer designation, and is an ISO 9001 Quality Management Systems lead auditor. He has worked in the construction industry since he was 16 as a laborer, helper, floor installer, and painter. And he's been with us here at Construction Safety for 10 years. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Amanda. So yeah, I'm very excited to be sharing this information with everybody today. So quick little background piece on here. So the National COR Accreditation Standard. So the construction safety associations from across Canada came together. So all the members of the Canadian Federation of Construction Safety Associations to develop this standard and this instrument. So the COR standard was approved in 2021 and the audit instrument was endorsed for use last year, 2022. Most provinces are planning to implement this COR harmonized audit instrument. Presently, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan are using this audit standard and audit instrument. They began this use January 1st of this year. Overall, though, from the administrative and process side, you'll not be seeing major changes there to how your external audits are completed or your internal audits are completed. So not much to go over in the way of that side of things. And some good news for companies. Many of your organizations have already been using practices, policies, and procedures that would meet the requirements of the new COR standard. So you've already done that work and superseded the requirements in the previous standard. So already set up for success with a lot of folks out there. Next slide, please. So some benefits of the new COR standard and COR audit instrument. So simplify the process of becoming COR certified and maintaining your COR certification and letter of good standing. You'll see some improved clarity in the language of the audit instrument. There won't be many questions, if any, that leave you, scratching your head as to what that means. The questions are straightforward. And in addition to the questions, there are very clear and detailed guidelines on how to score the question, what type of evidence is being assessed by the question, and really just providing a more fulsome explanation as to what the question is really getting at. They'll also make work in other provinces and territories a little bit easier for companies that travel across those borders with an easier COR reciprocity process there where the standard will be used across the country. So So less requirements to go work in New Brunswick or Manitoba or Saskatchewan, for example, now. And this will also set the stage for electronic options to complete your core audit. So we have the intent in the future to make things easier, allow you access to your data, and start to move away from a paper-based solution. Next slide, please. A brief summary of some of the changes you're going to see. Overall, the instrument is still going to be 15 sections. Sections 1 through 13 are the same subject matter. So Section 1, OHS policy, Section 2, hazard assessment, Section 3, safe work practices, and so on. So just a little bit of rewording, reorganizing of those sections there, maybe a question added, a question removed. Section 14 now will be looking at contractor and procurement, and Section 15 will be your provincial supplement, anything specific to the province of Nova Scotia and the requirements here. Again, most of those changes, like I mentioned, are changes in wording, simplified wording, change in a sequence of the questions. So in Section 8, in the current instrument that's in use, the first couple questions would be about new hire orientations, safety orientations. You'll see those bumped into the latter part of that section in the new instrument. So that change in sequence, change in source of evidence being assessed. Where old questions may have looked at documentation, observation, and interviews, a new question may just assess documentation or possibly just documentation and observation. You'll see some changes there, and some of the weighting of the evidence point values given to interviews, to documentation, things there, which are all going to be clearly outlined in each section's guidelines. So some questions have been removed from the instrument and some combined into one question. A larger change when it comes to the mechanics of the instrument itself would be the scoring methods used. You'll see the addition of and or questions in the instrument. I will explain those in some more detail later on in this presentation. But again, clear guidelines on the scoring of your questions and the evidence being assessed. So the audit instrument that you'll have will have those clear guidelines on how to score the instrument, how to weigh the evidence, and so on. So take the guesswork out of it there. Next slide. So what is the approach that we're taking to transition our membership over to the new COR standard? We are looking at September of this year for a soft launch there, where members having their audit done have a choice. Would you like to use the new instrument for your internal audit or stick with the existing one? When it's an external audit, would you prefer the auditor to evaluate you to the old standard or the new standard, and using those respective instruments there? The big date that we're looking at here is January 1st, 2024 is when all members will be using the new audit instrument for both your internal audits that you're conducting yourself on your safety program and the external audits where our OHS advisors come out and evaluate your safety program. Next slide, please. So with our change management approach here, we've consulted with multiple members of Construction Safety Nova Scotia, companies working within the construction industry, to see what we can do to best help our membership make this transition. And what we've aligned on here is having dedicated resources of CSNS OHS advisors and administrators always available to help you and your company on an individual basis. can simply call, email, contact us in whichever way is convenient, and set up an appointment, in person, Teams meeting, over the phone, whenever works for you. And we can help you out with your exact company's needs. We will have scheduled virtual question and answer sessions for our members. We'll have this webinar covering changes to the COR standard, like we're doing today, which again will be on our website for viewing at later times. We will have another webinar covering the instrument in more detail, looking at each section, the sources of evidence, and the scoring methodology. On our resources page on our website, we will have additional resources to what exists now to help members meet those new requirements. And we will also be developing a virtual instructor-led training course on how to complete the new COR audit instrument. And in addition, when audits are completed, clear suggestions and opportunities will be made in your audit report to help you meet those standards and improve the safety performance at your company. Next slide, please. So now into what everybody really wants to know. What are those new questions? What are those new requirements that you're going to be meeting under the new standard? So some new questions. Some stuff, again, is more breaking out a simple question and making it more detailed by having multiple questions. So during hazard assessments, are both existing and potential hazards identified and reported? Are you thinking ahead? Are you asking what if when you're doing a hazard assessment? Not looking at just what exists in the moment, but what comes up when this task is performed. What potential hazards will come up if other trades come on site or if conditions change? Which again, are we reevaluating those risks prior to work being performed, and are we reassessing and reevaluating when there's changes in the people, equipment, materials, environment, or processes? The design and layout of your work areas, ergonomics, machinery, and processes will need to be considered in your hazard assessments. And question 2.7, are personnel competent to participate in the hazard assessment process? What type of training and coaching and guidance have those workers, foremen, supervisors, and managers had regarding hazard identification, analysis, and control? 2.9, is the hierarchy of controls being applied when performing hazard assessments? And when hazard assessments are being completed, are individuals or roles assigned to implement those identified control measures, and then is that followed up on later to make sure those controls have been implemented and are working as planned? Next slide, please. Section 5, you'll see some changes. This is the section on rules. So does the policy, procedure, or guideline include responsibilities for setting, implementing, and complying with company rules? This is an additional step in what we've been looking for. Historically, it's, are there company rules? Is there a progressive discipline policy in place? Are these rules applied consistently? Now you want to take that step back and look at, do you have a policy or procedure on how those rules are set and enforced? And also making a distinction between company-specific rules for company employees and management, and those project work location-specific rules, which may differ and have different requirements based on the needs of that site. Section 8 is your training and communication. So looking a little bit deeper there, making sure companies are evaluating and taking the time to select appropriate health and safety training for their employees looking at the different jobs performed within the company and making sure each one of those jobs or roles receives the proper training so they can adequately perform their jobs. Is there a method for the evaluation and monitoring of the knowledge, competency, and effectiveness of safety and health training of employees? So it may not be enough, and in my opinion, it's often not enough to just say, go take a course, boom, you're good, you had that course, you know everything about that subject matter. Let's follow up a month after the course, 6 months after. Did they retain that knowledge? Are they putting that knowledge and skills to work? So taking some more time there with your planning on your training and your evaluation of that training. And 8.3, have appropriate individuals been trained in legislated requirements? In the current instrument that we've been using for the past decade or so, this question only looks at supervisors and managers. Now it's expanded to include all staff. Have they had that training in any of their legislated requirements? Next slide, please. For our inspection section, section 9, there's the addition of 2 questions on pre-use inspections of tools and equipment. That's in addition to your workplace or your system inspections, looking at how everything's functioning on site or in a workplace. So we have those 2 questions. Then is the required frequency of inspections being met by the supervisor and other responsible individuals? You'll see throughout the instrument that it's trying to capture more staff members in those questions, because it's not just supervisors and managers that have OHS responsibilities. It's everybody at that workplace. And this instrument does a great job of capturing and measuring that. Again, 9.7, does the inspection process include participation of all levels within the company? Workers, foremen, supervisors, managers, senior management is what we're looking for there, that they all are playing a role in that inspection process. Next slide, please. Some of the larger changes would be found in section 11, emergency preparedness. With the addition of questions, is emergency equipment readily available and well marked? Now, what this emergency equipment is depends on the type of work you do, the environment you're working in, and so on. And is that equipment inspected on a regular basis and maintained in good working order? Have emergency procedures and response plans been reviewed and revised as appropriate? This is in addition to having your drills or your practice scenarios. And is relevant information made available to all affected persons regarding emergency response plans? Section 12 is your documentation and statistics section there. 12.1 asks, are approved and current versions of applicable documents readily available at the point of use? That's a wordy way of saying, is the hazard assessment form that's on site the most recent version of that form? Is the inspection form the most recent version, the one that's supposed to be in use? So document control exercise there, making sure that people have the appropriate forms so that they can perform their job and make sure that the workplace is safe. Then we'll also examine leading and lagging performance measures. So your lagging is past incidents, things that have happened, injury rates, incidents, what's been done. Leading indicators are more proactive, positive activities that you are looking at. So we don't want to only look at incident rates. So we want to look at those more proactive leading indicators. Next slide, please. And section 14, this is your contractor and procurement section. So we'll see some changes here. So for companies that have used subcontractors in the past, you're familiar with these questions here. In addition to just managing say contractors, which is the legal term for subcontractors. We'll still be managing those folks. But there's the addition there of service providers. So that can be, the electrician that comes to perform work at your office. They're not a subcontractor. They're providing a service to you there. Do you have controls in place for the selection, evaluation, and monitoring of those folks that are providing a service to your company? We're looking at, do your contractors and service providers have the ability to identify hazards in the workplace that can affect their own workers, your workers, or any other person at or near the workplace? How do you know that, and how can you show that? Are you following your systems that you've put in place for the selection, evaluation, and monitoring of contractors and service providers? Wants your system to coordinate health and safety requirements, roles, and responsibilities on those multiple subcontractor or multiple employer sites for those folks under your control? And 14.5 and 0.6 look at the procurement side of things for products. Now, these products can include your hazardous products regulated under WHMIS, tools, hand tools, power tools, pneumatic tools, list goes on, or all the way up to heavy equipment. Have you done an assessment there to ensure that you've selected the right product for the job? It's the safest product that you can get that does the job. It meets your needs there. And then the follow-up there is that process being followed. Next slide, please. And then we have some new questions in our provincial supplement. So as part of the Workers' Compensation Board Safety Certified Program, which you get that certification in addition to your core certification, as of January 1st, 2024, there's a requirement under that WCB Safety Certified to have return to work questions and to assess a company's return to work policy, program. Does the policy and program include roles and responsibilities? Is there company-specific return to work training for all levels of the company? And do you evaluate the effectiveness of your return to work program? And in addition, we've added one final question. We've been spearheading a campaign to increase mental health and psychological safety awareness in the industry, and as such, included this question here of, does the company use initiatives or program to support or educate workers in mental health and psychosocial hazards that can be found in the workplace? Next slide, please. So again, here you just see those questions. So some evidence to satisfy new requirements. The great thing about this instrument and these guidelines, it's going to tell you what possible sources of evidence may be used to satisfy those requirements. What shows evidence that you are doing what is being asked of you by the standard. So you can see here, question 2.4. The question would be, do hazard assessments reassess, reevaluate when there's a change in people, equipment, materials, environment, and processes? So we'd be looking at, the frequency of this type of assessment will depend on how often changes occur. If nothing changes, we wouldn't expect the hazard assessment form to change. But when there are these changes, need to see that this form is being updated throughout the day. It's a living document. The hazard assessment's not just done at the beginning of the day, set aside, and not re-examined or added to. When things change, we assess those hazards, assess the risk, determine how we can work safely, update the hazard assessment form, inform all affected persons of those changes, and then carry on with our work when it's safe to do so. So you'll see that laid out there. When we're asking about ergonomics and layout of work areas, you'll see some sources of evidence being safe job procedures, tailored work schedules, PPE can be evidenced that it's noted in a hazard assessment. It can be lifting aids, anything there to make the job easier, safer when it comes to ergonomics and workplace design. Next slide, please. So a quick overview of the design of the instrument. This is what your guidelines section would look like. You'll find this before your scoring table in each section. So for section 6, you have your guidelines for PPE. Little note there on small businesses. Sometimes there's not applicables for them in a section. In this case, all apply. So you'll see there what we're looking at. So 6.1, a guideline on that question. 2, determine like the criteria used for basic and specialized PPE selection. What we would do, review hazard assessments forms, SDSs, codes of practice, PPE policies, CSA standards, list goes on, and confirm understanding with employees through interviews. And then you see how the scoring can work. Award 2 points based on documentation. And then 2 points can be awarded based on positive interview responses. So if the documentation didn't exist, but the interviews were positive, you could award 2 points for interviews, 0 for your documentation, and vice versa. If both exist, which is what's great, you get your 4 points. If neither exist, 0. So you'll see that throughout all the guidelines there. Some assistance on what you're looking for and how to score it. Next slide, please. So most of you are familiar with the tables that we use when we're doing the audits. Not much has changed there, but there is, like I mentioned earlier, the addition of and or questions there. Score weighting, you'll see when it's possible to allocate partial points, you'll see a 0-4 or 5, whenever it may be. When it's a sort of all or nothing question, it's either 0 or 2, 0 or 4. You'll see that there. Next slide, please. And this is just sort of to illustrate how your guidelines are tied back to those questions. So you'd see 6.6 is our system in place to regular inspect and maintain PPE. You'd look at the page with the guidelines like we just saw, and it's going to give you all that information. There'll be observation questions in there as well, which is another part of the instrument we'll see in a second. Next slide, please. So in addition to the table you just saw, you'll have another scoring table that you will use throughout the audit. And this would be your observation checklist here. Do personnel have access to specialized PPE for specific activities? Is fall arrest required? Do they have fall arrest equipment? That's what you're asking there. Is correct PPE used by personnel when required? There's a hazard to the eye. Folks are wearing safety glasses, goggles, face shield if there's a hazard to the face, and so on there. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to pop in quickly. Sorry to interrupt you, Ryan, but I wanted to make sure that everyone knows if you have any questions for Ryan, then you can put that in the chat in whatever social platform you're watching us on. So I guess it would be the comments section. So you can put that in right underneath where you see the video, just type that in, and then we see it as a chat here in the back end. And Ryan will answer those at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, definitely get those in now. And now I will change the slide.
Thanks, Amanda. And finally, your interview scoring table. No changes there. It's the same format, the same protocol for scoring those as it has always been. More positive than negative, then that's a positive. If it's a 50-50 split between positive and negative, it's a positive. And if there's more negative than positives, then of course it's going to be scored negatively, which will equate to an X back in your scoring table. And again, employee and management questions worded a little bit differently, assessing different aspects of that question because their roles are different. within the health and safety management system. Next slide, please. So scoring. We'll touch briefly on this, but we'll have more to come on a subsequent webinar to really get into the details of how to do this. So we have and questions that are partial points or all or nothing. We have or questions, which can be partial points, or we have partial point questions, which may look at all three sources of evidence, as 2.1 does. And there's even a few partial points where we're just assessing documentation, leading and lagging indicators, for example, where if lagging indicators are there, 1 point. If leading indicators are there, 1 point. If both are there, 2 points. So with the and questions, there, like I said, sometimes, and you'll see in the guidelines, it will specify if it's an all or nothing, that for this example, 2.2 may say documentation and interviews both have to be scored positively to award points. In other cases, it may say if documentation exists, award 3 points for documentation. If interviews are positive, award 3 points for interviews, for example. Or questions, only one of those sources of evidence has to be confirmed positive to award points. So it may be through observation, it wasn't practical to look at that, but the documentation part showed that it was. So there's a bit of a qualifier there, and you'll see in the guidelines, but for those ORs, one or the other source of evidence needs to exist to award your points, but not both. If you have both, fantastic. If you don't have either, 0 points there. Next slide, please. And just an example of the question 2.1, which is really the only one that exists like that in this format. In the guideline, it would say award 3 points for documentation, 2 for observations, and 2 for interview. So in this case, you have your documentation, good, check. Observations, good, but interviews were negative, which equals your 5 points there. And again, always refer back to those guidelines. They're your friends. They're clear, descriptive, and a great help. Next slide, please. And so your final scoring summary sheet, like we're familiar with from using with the instrument that's in use at the moment. So if we look through here, you'll see total possible score is 390. You need to have at least 312 points to meet that, which if we look up in the top right-hand corner, the minimum standard for this audit is 80% overall score and 50% in each section. So that is the percentage standard there. And of course, if there's corrective actions due to an item being a regulatory or legislative issue, that would, again, have to be resolved before your core certification is granted and your letter of good standing is issued. Next slide, please. Q&A. Perfect. I see one question. Thank you for that. So what is the ratio for asking questions to staff and management? So we haven't set an exact ratio, but in practice, we've always tried to apply, the 2/3 staff, 1/3 management there. So, 66% to 33% staff and management. And we understand that due to just the daily nature of construction and what you, our members, are facing, that sometimes those things aren't always exactly practical to hit those exact numbers. We try our best at all times, but that's generally the ratio.
Thanks, Ryan. And just what about owner operators? Do they need to do anything differently? Maybe we can speak to that a bit.
So owner operators will be using the instrument that they presently use. There will be no changes for owner operators regarding audit instrument, audit standard, additional training, anything like that. This instrument applies to the classifications of small business, intermediate, and standard. So owner operators, no changes to your audit process or tool.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. We'll just wait maybe a couple more seconds here to see if any other questions come in. So just a reminder, if you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, you can just write in the comments and we'll see them pop up here. Maybe while we're just waiting a couple more seconds, Ryan, I know one of the things that has popped up with some of our members is wondering about the core training. So do they need to redo any of their core training that they've already previously completed?
That is a great question. So being a trainer and working for an organization that does a lot of training, I'd always recommend taking as much training as you can, but no. If you have your core evaluation training from the past, that will still be recognized. You do not have to redo any training. It is my recommendation that you do join us for that virtual instructor-led training on the new COR standard. Just to pick up on those nuances and make your job that much easier. But no, it is not a requirement. We will recognize your existing core training.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, I think that's it. No more questions are rolling in here, but we definitely want to stress, Construction Safety Nova Scotia is here to help you with these changes. So please reach out to any current connections you might already have at our organization, or just shoot us an email at info@constructionsafetyns.ca. You can call us. You can come to 35 McDonald Avenue in Burnside, or our new office in Sydney as well. We have an advisor there at 850 Grand Lake Road. So however you want to reach out to us, we're here to help you. And I do want to mention that this webinar, the recording of it, as well as the slides that Ryan went through today, are going to be on that COR page on our website. So I'll put those up today so you can have that for reference. And we hope to see you all again on July 20th, where Ryan's going to do a deep dive into the new audit instrument. So see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.